I'm Captain Riley Monroe, and on the morning of my 32nd birthday, I was sitting in a civilian courtroom about to be declared mentally incompetent. That was the headline of my life. I sat at a polished wooden table, my hands folded tight in my lap to hide the shaking, listening to my own mother argue that I could not be trusted to run my own life. The air in the room felt thick, like it had weight, and every breath I took felt borrowed. I had worn my most neutral gray suit, the kind meant to make you disappear, because anything that hinted at the military seemed to make things worse. To the judge, a tired man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, I was not a former senior intelligence officer. I was a case file, a tragedy, a broken thing. My mother, Eleanor, sat just a few feet away. She was close enough that I could smell her perfume, lilac and expensive powder, the same one she wore to charity luncheons where she accepted sympathy for her troubled daughter. She never once looked at me directly. Instead, she stared at the table as her attorney spoke for her, calmly explaining that her daughter suffered from severe anxiety, disorientation, and neurological trauma that made independent decision-making unsafe. I remember thinking how strange it was to hear my life reduced to symptoms. Her lawyer, a slick man named Peterson, talked about my tremor. He talked about my insomnia. He talked about the medication I took after leaving active duty. He said these things gently, almost kindly, like he was describing a broken appliance instead of a human being. "Your Honor," Peterson said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "Ms. Monroe is a danger to her own financial and physical well-being. She requires a conservatorship. Her mother simply wants to provide the safety she can no longer provide for herself." I wanted to speak. I wanted to stand up and explain that none of this meant what they thought it meant. But the rules of that room were clear. I was there to be evaluated, not understood. Every time my fingers shook against the fabric of my trousers, I could feel eyes flicker toward them, confirming a story that had already been written. What hurt the most was not the courtroom or the legal language. It was the fact that the woman who raised me truly believed this. She believed I was fragile. She believed the military had taken something from me and left only damage behind. 30 minutes earlier, I had walked into that building as a grown woman with a career spent making impossible decisions under pressure. Now I was being framed as a liability, a risk that needed supervision. I sat there silently, my spine straight, my jaw locked, knowing that if this hearing went the way she wanted, I would lose more than money or control. I would lose the right to define who I was. My mother never yelled. She never cursed or slammed doors. But she knew how to cut deeper than anyone I've ever met. With a smile on her face and a tone that sounded like concern. Growing up, I learned early that approval in our house was earned through appearances. Perfect posture, perfect grades, perfect silence. She would boast endlessly about my father's decorated service in the Marines, always pausing at the part where he died in uniform. He was her hero, her martyr. Then she'd glance at me and say something like, "Riley works in the military too, but it's different. It's behind a screen. At least she's safe." That word always stuck. Safe. It was code for unimpressive, for unworthy. My medals were kept in a drawer, while my father's were framed above the fireplace. At family dinners, I was background noise. If someone asked what I did, she'd wave it off before I could answer. "She's in logistics or computers, I think," she'd say, with that breathy little laugh that implied none of it really mattered. "She helps organize things." I used to think she just didn't understand what I did. That if I could explain the hours, the stakes, the real lives depending on my analysis, she'd finally see me. But now, sitting in this courtroom, I realized the truth. She understood perfectly. She just didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to believe that someone like me, quiet, reserved, the daughter with the shaking hands, could matter more than the ghost she had already made into a hero. She needed me to be broken, because if I were broken, she could be the saint who took care of me. So when she filed the petition for conservatorship, claiming I was psychologically unfit to manage my own assets and medical decisions, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of brushing me aside. Peterson built his case around my medical file. He picked apart every therapy session, every prescription, every recorded episode of stress-induced tremors. "This is a troubling pattern of instability," Peterson told the judge. "Ms. Monroe has episodes where she cannot hold a cup of coffee without spilling it. How can she be expected to manage an estate? She is a woman on the edge of collapse." I wasn't just being misunderstood. I was being erased. The worst part was watching her nod along. My own mother. I agreed that I needed to be protected from myself. She didn't want custody of me because she loved me. She wanted control. She wanted the power to shape my narrative the way she had always shaped every room she entered. And in that courtroom, for the first time, she found a stage big enough to try. Most people think war looks like guns, dust, and soldiers on the ground. They picture my father's war. But my war was fought in a windowless room, 6 stories underground, surrounded by servers and absolute silence. The only weapons we carried were data, time, and the burden of absolute precision. I worked in a SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility. No phones, no windows. Every keycard swipe is logged. The air was recycled and cold. Screens glowed in the dim light, filled with intercepted signals, satellite footage, and lines of code that could mean nothing or everything. We watched threats unfold in real time, 4,000 miles away, with only seconds to interpret, decide, and act. My title on paper was Senior Intelligence Analyst, but what I really did was translate chaos. One wrong interpretation, one missed detail in a drone feed, one misread of a thermal signature, and someone died. Or worse, the wrong person died. I carried that pressure every day, knowing my judgment was all that stood between safety and disaster for people I would never meet. There were no battle cries in that room, only the soft hum of servers and the sound of typing fingers. We learned to read silence like others read maps. A missing transmission, a power spike, a heartbeat out of rhythm in an encrypted call. It all meant something. People assume working behind a screen is easy. They call it safe. They don't see the toll it takes to be trusted with invisible lives. They don't understand that when you push a button on a screen, you're not just sending data. You're authorizing a kinetic strike. You are holding the trigger, just from a different distance. We didn't wear body armor. We didn't have parades. But we made decisions that altered global outcomes. And we did it quietly, knowing no one outside that room would ever know our names. That silence wasn't just part of the job. It was the job. And the tremor? The shaking hands that my mother's lawyer was currently using as evidence of my incompetence? That wasn't a flaw. That was a receipt. There was one day that still lives in my body. It's the reason I shake. It was 3 years ago. The Black Sea corridor. We had picked up an irregular pattern in the signal traffic near a hostile border. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. Too quiet. Like a whisper before a scream. I spent 13 hours in that chair, eyes locked on cascading data streams, trying to decrypt what we were seeing. Every minute brought more weight. Lives were in motion. A U.S. Special Forces convoy was headed straight into a coordinated cyber-jamming trap, designed to make them vanish from our radar so they could be ambushed without a distress signal. If we didn't act, 12 men would be executed on live video. The room was tense. The general in charge was hesitating. The data was messy. I stood up. I laid out the intercept pattern. I showed them the anomaly in the code. "They are baiting us," I told the general. "Authorize extraction. Reroute them to Point Delta, now." The general looked at me. I was a major. He was a 2-star. "Are you certain, Major?" he asked. "If you're wrong, we blow an operation that took 2 years to build." "I am certain," I said. My voice never shook. My mind was crystal clear. But my body? My body was absorbing the cortisol of 1,000 life-or-death decisions compressed into seconds. The operation was successful. They pulled the convoy out with 90 seconds to spare. We saved the team. We shut down an international incident before it started. No one died that night. Except for a version of me. When the adrenaline finally crashed, my hands started shaking. And they never really stopped. The doctors called it stress-induced neurological tremor. It's what happens when your nervous system runs at 100% capacity for too long. There is no cure, only management. But to me, it wasn't a weakness. It was the cost of doing business. It was the physical price of being the person who makes the call when no one else can. You don't get to walk through fire, even from behind a screen, and come out untouched. Some people carry their scars on the outside. Mine lived in my hands. I didn't bleed in battle, but I still left pieces of myself on the line. And sitting in that courtroom, listening to my mother use my sacrifice as a weapon against me, I realized I was done being quiet. When Peterson filed the motion to unseal my full military medical record, my own lawyer, Mr. Davis, panicked. "We have to fight this," Davis hissed at me during a recess. "If they see the PTSD diagnosis, if they see the tremor treatments we lose, they'll paint you as unstable." But I saw something he didn't. I saw a trap door. "No," I said calmly. "Let them have it." Davis looked at me like I was crazy. "Riley, are you listening? They will destroy you." "I'll agree to unseal the records," I said, pulling a notepad toward me. "But under one condition." I drafted the response myself. I added a specific clause buried in the procedural language, citing Department of Defense Regulation 5200-01. Any release of medical records tied to classified operations must be physically transferred and verified by a commanding officer of rank 06 or higher in the presence of the presiding judge. It was standard protocol for intelligence officers, but to a civilian lawyer like Peterson, it just looked like bureaucratic red tape. I knew exactly what I was doing. I sent a secure message to the only man who could help, Colonel Adam McAdams, my former commander, the man who was in the room that night on the Black Sea. I didn't ask for a favor. I didn't beg. I simply notified him that my records that contained details of Operation Silent Watch, were being subpoenaed by a civilian court. He didn't reply with words. He replied with a read receipt. Peterson smiled when the judge approved the motion. He thought he had won. He thought he was about to pull back a curtain on my weakness. He had no clue he was about to walk into a buzzsaw. The courtroom doors opened with a soft creak that somehow echoed like thunder. Every head turned. Colonel Adam McAdams stepped in. He was dressed in his full Army service uniform, the dark blue coat, the gold stripes on the sleeves, rows of ribbons stacked high on his chest. gleaming under the cold fluorescent lights. He didn't rush. His steps were slow, deliberate, and precise. The sound of his boots on the tile floor was the only noise in the room. He wasn't here for show. He was here for duty. Peterson looked confused. "Who is this?" Colonel McAdams ignored him. He walked straight to the bench. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at my mother. He stopped in front of the judge. "Your Honor," McAdams said. His voice was deep, calm, and filled the room without effort. "I am Colonel Adam McAdams, United States Army Intelligence Command." The judge blinked, startled by the intrusion. "Colonel, this is a family court hearing, unless you are a character witness." "I am not a witness, Your Honor," McAdams interrupted politely but firmly. "I am the custodian of record for Major Riley Monroe." He pulled a thick, heavy envelope from his briefcase. It was sealed with red tape and stamped in bold red ink. "Top secret, CI, no foreign eyes only, presiding judge." The air in the room changed instantly. The casual atmosphere of a civil dispute vanished, replaced by the heavy gravity of national security. McAdams held the envelope out. "The opposing counsel subpoenaed Major Monroe's medical history," McAdams said. "Because Major Monroe's injuries were sustained during classified operations vital to national security, I cannot allow these records to be entered into public evidence." He placed the envelope on the judge's desk. "However," McAdams continued, "I am authorized to allow you, and only you, to review the origin of injury report. This will clarify the nature of the defendant's condition." The judge looked at the envelope. He looked at McAdams. Then he looked at me. I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded. I wasn't shaking. The judge opened the envelope. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. He read it. As he read, his expression shifted. The boredom vanished. His eyes widened. His face paled slightly. He looked up at me, then back at the paper, then at me again. It was a look of disbelief and fear. Peterson stood up, annoyed. "Your Honor, I object. We have a right to see the evidence. If her condition is debilitating—" The judge slammed his hand down. "Sit down, Mr. Peterson." The judge turned to McAdams. "Colonel, is this accurate? This authority level?" "Yes, Your Honor," McAdams said. McAdams turned to face the room. He looked at my mother. "You claim your daughter is incompetent," McAdams said. He didn't yell. He spoke with a quiet, lethal intensity. "You see a woman with shaking hands," McAdams said. "I see the officer whose steady hand saved 300 American lives in the Black Sea corridor." My mother gasped. "Her tremor is not a defect," McAdams continued. "It is a physiological result of sustaining focus for 14 hours straight while orchestrating a counteroffensive that prevented a war. It is a combat injury," Peterson stammered. But she's an analyst. She works at a desk. She needs supervision." McAdams turned to the judge. "Your Honor," McAdams said, "the document you are holding confirms that Major Monroe holds Tier 1 operational clearance. She currently retains the authority to authorize drone strikes and access intelligence databases that, with all due respect, you are not cleared to even know the names of." The judge looked at the document again. "If you grant this conservatorship," McAdams said, delivering the final blow, "you are effectively handing control of top-secret national assets to a civilian with no security clearance." He pointed at my mother. "That woman cannot manage Riley Monroe's life, because Riley Monroe carries secrets that would send her mother to federal prison if she even heard them." The silence was deafening. My mother looked at me. She looked terrified. For the first time, she realized the magnitude of the mistake she had made. She thought she was fighting for control of a broken child. Instead, she had tried to leash a titan. The judge closed the file. He slid it back into the envelope and handed it to McAdams with a trembling hand. "Motion denied," the judge said. His voice was hoarse. "The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with extreme prejudice," the judge ruled quickly. "This court finds absolutely no evidence of incompetence. In fact—" The judge looked at me with profound respect. "It seems Major Monroe is more competent than anyone in this room." Peterson slumped in his chair. He knew he had lost. My mother stood up slowly. Her face was a mask of confusion and regret. She walked toward me, reaching out a hand. "Riley," she whispered. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her. I saw the woman who had made me feel small my whole life, the woman who wanted me to be weak so she could feel strong. "You didn't want to know," I said quietly. "You wanted to be right." I didn't take her hand. I turned to Colonel McAdams. He didn't smile. He just nodded. It was the same nod he gave me in the SIF when I made the right call. "Ready to go, Major?" he asked. "Yes, Colonel," I said. We walked out of the courtroom together. Outside, the sun was shining. It felt different. Lighter. My mother didn't follow us. She stayed in the courtroom, sitting alone at the table, realizing that the narrative she had built was gone. I stood on the courthouse steps and took a deep breath. My hands were still shaking, just a little. I looked at them. For years I had hidden them. I had been ashamed of them. I had let my mother convince me they were a sign of brokenness. But Colonel McAdams was right. They were receipts. They were proof that I had been there, that I had held the line. I wasn't broken. I was a veteran of a silent war. The lecture hall was quiet. Rows of young faces looked up at me, future intelligence officers at the academy. I stood at the podium. I had prepared slides, data, and case studies. But I decided to start with something else. I lifted my hands. I held them up for all to see. The tremor was there, visible. "This," I said to the class, "is not weakness." The room was still. "This is the signature of pressure survived," I said. "This is what happens when you care more about the mission than you do about yourself." I saw a young cadet in the front row. She was looking at my hands, then at her own. She looked inspired. "You are entering a profession that will not give you medals," I told them. "It will not give you parades. It will ask for your silence, and sometimes it will take a piece of you." I lowered my hands. "But those pieces you lose? They are the price of the lives you save, and that is a price worth paying." I started the lecture. My voice was steady. My mind was clear. I was Major Riley Monroe, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be.